Normally, I talk about prose creative writing specifically. That's because that's what I love to write myself. It's what I've studied more. But I have also studied poetry because when you study other areas of writing besides your primary one, you learn new techniques and tricks you can use to make your chosen style or genre even more impactful on your reader. So today I'm going to switch gears and I want to talk about shapes on the page, how to format poetry. This is based on a question one of my creative writing students asked me. Like voice, how to format a poem is a tricky part of writing to explain because it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do, what your style is, all sorts of things. However, there are some decisions you need to make and some tricks you can use to help you make those choices. So there's not really a wrong way to format a poem, but there are ways that might be better to get your intentions as the author across than other ways of formatting that same poem. So one of the first things you need to know in order to find your poem's format is its purpose, and then you need to know what type of poem are you writing. So that's what we're going to talk about. And if you hang on until the end, I'll tell you how to find more resources on creative writing that have been vetted by an editor. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. Let's start with determining your poem's purpose. Your poem's purpose is the mental image or emotion you're trying to inspire in your reader. This can be as simple as having them feel the comfort of a nice, easy, relaxed day, or as complicated as trying to get someone to experience the pain of a miscarriage when they have never lost anyone they cared about. Once you've identified your poem's purpose, you can use that purpose to inform your formatting choices. For example, concrete poetry is the poetry that makes shapes out of the words and the white space and other aspects of the text. Concrete poetry generally has a more whimsical feel to it. So if you're trying to write about something really intense, a concrete poem might not always be the best choice. In particular, if you're trying to create a nice and neat image with your concrete poem, that's not going to align with some of the more messy feelings that we might get from some darker areas of poetry. So the messiness and the neatness might not go together. However, if you're trying to convey something more whimsical, a concrete poem can be a great format to use. So here's an example of what this looks like. This is a concrete poem I wrote in high school. It's the first thing I ever had published in a magazine. I chose this format for a handful of reasons. First, I wanted to create a concrete poem where the image was in the white space instead of the words, because all of the examples we'd seen in my English class were of the words making the picture, and I wanted to be a little different. Second, this piece is a positive interpretation of my experience in band. I loved band in high school, so I wanted to document that. And finally, I didn't think the poem itself was that good. I still don't really consider myself much of a poet, so I was trying to give it more oomph. Each line in this poem is dedicated to a single section of the band, so that's how I chose where to put the line breaks. And that gave me that block of text to work with and create this music note. So that's an example of a concrete poem and my thought process as to why I chose that format. Now I will say that third reason where I didn't think the poem was very good is not a good enough reason to choose a weird form. If I was doing that today or working with one of my authors, I would tell them and myself that you need to work on the poem and make that as good as you can so that it doesn't need this fancy format, and then you can go back and play with the form. The poem should stand on its own. Part of the reason for that is if you do something weird with the form, it can be harder to follow your piece of writing, whether it's poetry or prose. So we want to make sure that the other aspects of the text are not necessarily conventional, but easy to follow and understand so that our reader is willing to hang on with us through that weirdness. Now, after you've identified your poem's purpose, that can help you figure out the form. Like if you want a more whimsical feel, concrete poetry can be a good option. And also realize that your form can help convey the tone and emotion of your poem. So if you know what the purpose is, if you know what that core emotion is that you want your reader to feel, you can use that to figure out what the form should look like. Next, I want to talk about what kind of poem are you writing? Like concrete poems, poems like sonnets, villanelles, and other rhymed and metered poems have a set form. They have a specific number of syllables that go in each line. That's going to tell you where your line breaks are. They have a specific rhyming pattern, and they have a specific stanza setup. So that's 3 parts of your form that the poem structure itself is going to determine for you. You don't really have to figure it out. Dylan Thomas's "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" is an excellent example of this, and it's well known, so most people have heard it. Here are the first 2 stanzas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning they, do not go gentle into that good night. Poems like this have a nice tight format. The lines are roughly the same length, and the stanzas all have the same number of lines in them except the last one. Stanzas are like poem paragraphs. Villanelles have the rhyme pattern A1, B, A2, A, B, A1, A, B, A2, A, B, A1, A, B, A2, A, B, A1, A2. The lines A1 and A2 are the exact same lines. Lines marked as a lowercase a all rhyme with each other, and lines marked with a lowercase b all rhyme with each other. A villanelle, which is what this is, doesn't have to be in iambic pentameter, but they do often employ that distinctive rhythm. The overall effect is a very boxy, orderly poem shape on the page. So I know that's a lot of technical poem information that I just shoved at you all at once. It's easiest to understand if you just look at an example. This is what most people think of when you say you write poetry. They think of this very structured, orderly poem that we all studied in school. But poetry can be a lot freer than that. That harsh structure sometimes is restrictive. It doesn't allow us to convey what we want to. So most modern poets actually have broken out of that form, and they write in what we call free verse. Free verse is more erratic. It might not have any rhyme scheme or a broken one. Where the line breaks occur is up to you as the poet. There's no predetermined form or syllable count or anything like that. That's why it's called free verse. Again, this is popular with modern poets. So here's an example of that from Rupi Kaur's Milk and Honey. Even after the hurt, the loss, the pain, the breaking, your body is still the only one I want to be undressed under. Here, Kaur chooses her line breaks for emotional effect. The first 4 lines are describing the hurt. Each line gets more specific and elicits a more intense emotional pain from the reader. The last 4 lines are broken up to play with reader expectation and inspire a new emotion. Based on the poem's rhythm, a reader expects Kaur to say, "Your body is still, the only one I want to be with." But Kaur chooses to get more specific than this. Instead, she wants to depict the messiness of relationships and desire. That's why she chooses to replace that with undressed under. The line breaks and shape of this poem help her get her point across. So when you're writing in free verse in particular, line breaks are super powerful. Often poets and authors will choose to have a line break in the middle of a thought or sentence. This forces your reader to pause and is an excellent opportunity to provide a twist, to guide them towards one expectation and then shift to something different. We like being surprised in that way. It's going to keep our attention. It's going to keep someone reading. It also provides an opportunity for you to shift the emotion that they're feeling. So line breaks in free verse are very important. You can also just have a line break at the end of your thought or your sentence, or whatever you choose. Just don't be afraid to play with them if you're doing poetry in free verse. So those are the two extreme form choices when it comes to poems. You either pick a really structured, prescriptive format or one that's entirely loose and free. There are ones in the middle. I'd argue that the concrete poem is more in the middle. It has a structure, but it's very loose. Next, I want to talk about an editor's guidelines for general poem format. If you don't want to play too much with format and structure, or you just want to know what the general basics are, here are some guidelines. You want to left align your poem. Don't center it. That became a weird, common format when computers were invented because it was easy to do. But traditional poems are left aligned, so unless you have a reason to center it, don't do it. It makes you look like an amateur. Similarly, most word processors will automatically capitalize the first letter of a new line. That should be your decision as the author, not the word processor's decision. Especially if you're doing what I said and you're putting a line break in an interesting place in free verse or something like that, you might not want to capitalize the first word in that next line because it's almost a sentence, a continuation of the previous line. So that should be your decision, not your program's. You might have to turn off that automatic capitalization or go back and take them away. In Carr's poetry, she doesn't capitalize anything, not even I. Now, you can do some variation of this. Sometimes in poetry, we capitalize certain words to make them stand out more, to show that they're the theme of the poem, or maybe we're using them as a name in an interesting way. And sometimes we're choosing not to capitalize something that normally would be for a similar reason, to make it blend in more with the poem's other words. So capitalization is your decision in poetry. Sometimes when you might want to start a new line, or you have a new thought, you're going to make some twist, like I already talked about, or you want to make your reader pause for a moment, to have that last thing that you said linger with them just for a split second longer. Similarly, you're going to start a new stanza when you move on to a new idea. There's some sort of break in the flow of your poem. You want your reader to pause longer. You're going to start a new rhyming scheme or restart your rhyming scheme. Something like that. Now, not all poems have to have stanzas. They're kind of like poetry paragraphs. Not all poems are long enough to need them. Most poems have line breaks, but not all do either. There are prose poems, which are structured like prose, like fiction or nonfiction. They're more of a paragraph sentence format, but they have the thought process. They move from one idea to the next like a poem, not like a story. I can't really tell you this is how you generally format a poem like I can a short story. In a short story, I can tell you this is how you make a sentence. This is times when you use quotation marks. This is usually when you might want to start a new paragraph break. Poems are a bit looser than that. I can tell you most are left aligned, but you don't have to. I can tell you the capital thing, but you don't have to. It depends on the purpose of your poem, so you need to go back to that. What emotion are you trying to convey? What are you trying to get your reader to experience or feel with your piece? And what format is going to best convey that intention? A good way to learn this is to read poetry. Find some that you love and pay attention to their format. Ask yourself, why did that poet choose to put a line break there? Why did they choose not to include stanzas, or to only have two and one is really short? What was the purpose of that? What's that doing for the poem? Learn through examples. You might try emulating some of your favorite poets until you become more comfortable making these choices on your own. That's actually how we all learn. We learn through imitation first. Once you've mastered that imitation, it's time to move on and develop your own unique writing style. So, those are my poetry formatting guidelines. Not rules, guidelines. How do you approach formatting your poems? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more videos on poetry, prose, and other aspects of writing, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. You can find out more about me at www.ignitedinkwriting.com. That's where you will find that cheat sheet checklist I was talking about. If you need more guidance on your creative writing journey, I have a list of writing books I've personally read and found useful and why. So if you're looking for a book that's going to help you develop characters, I have a suggestion for that. If you're looking for the best general beginning creative writing book, I have a suggestion for that. You'll find that at my website and linked below. One last point, when I mentioned that we need to study other types of writing, you also never know when it's going to come up in your story. My book, When Magic Calls, is a collection of short stories. These are modern takes on fairy tales. It's asking what they would look like if they were taking place in our contemporary world. I didn't think there'd be any poetry in it. But in one of the stories, a character is singing a song, and the song is actually a spell. So I wrote that as a poem. Again, probably not the best poem in the world, but I liked it. I think it works for that scene. You might come across a similar situation. So that's why it's good to study all aspects of writing, not just your favorite genre to write. And now it's your turn to try out different poetry formats to figure out which one is best for your poem's purpose and ignite your ink.